Star Trek Insurrection from 1998. Oh man, this movie. Where do I even begin? It is the follow-up to one of the most critically successful Star Trek movies, Star Trek First Contact. And it's frankly bizarre. When I first saw it in 1998, I was 14, and I was super into Star Trek, which of course didn't really do me any favors in my teenage social life. And at the time, I really liked the movie. I didn't think it was as good as First Contact, but I still thought it was really good. In fact, I saw it 3 times when it was in theaters. I'm a little embarrassed to admit that, but every time I've watched it since 1998, I've liked it less and less. And it's been a while since I have watched it. It's not a movie I revisit that often, and I'm sure that's true for a lot of Star Trek fans. And up until now, I had reached the point where I just kind of considered Insurrection to be benign. It's not good, but it's not terrible. And while I still don't think it's terrible, I'm inching in that direction. It does feel very much like a 2-part episode of the show, and a mediocre one at that. And there was a time when I would have said this movie is better than Star Trek Generations. And I don't feel that way anymore. And for those of you who have seen my video on Star Trek Generations, that's kind of saying a lot. Insurrection is just a movie that is super inconsistent and ultimately uninteresting. And I think the Next Generation movies as a whole are a series of tonal course corrections. You know, First Contact was a darker movie. Insurrection is much more lighter in tone, despite the circumstances and the title indicating otherwise. And then Nemesis is just super dark again. So it's like they were constantly looking for this Goldilocks moment with these movies, and they never found it. I hope I can do this, because Generations gets me fired up for how ridiculous it is, and I love First Contact, so those movies were easy for me to talk about. But as I said, this one is kind of uninteresting, so it's going to be a challenge for me. So I guess we'll see. But I think we should just get into it. Star Trek Insurrection from 1998, directed by Jonathan Frakes, starring Patrick Stewart, F. Murray Abraham, Donna Murphy, and of course, the main cast of Star Trek The Next Generation. It opens up on a planet that I'm pretty sure remains nameless throughout this entire movie, but I could be wrong. And the Federation is collaborating with a group of galactic criminals called the Sona. We'll talk more about these stretchy scrotum-faced bastards later. They're observing the planet's seemingly pre-industrial population in secret. They're using a holographically concealed bunker to collect data on the inhabitants. We've seen this in the Next Generation episode, Who Watches the Watchers? It's called a duct-blind mission. And I have no idea how they set up this bunker without being detected, because unlike Who Watches the Watchers, this observation bunker is nearly on top of the village. So how they tunneled out rock and set up this bunker undetected, I'll never know. And several Starfleet personnel are wearing EV suits that are cloaked. They are completely invisible to the villagers, who are called the Baku. Now, it's very strange that Starfleet has the ability to cloak individual people. This takes place at the height of the Dominion War, and you'd think that Starfleet would have implemented this technology at some point to help fight the Dominion. You know, they signed a treaty with the Romulans that prevents them from using cloaking devices on Federation ships, but apparently cloaking individual people is just fine. And for some reason, Data is taking part in this mission, which makes absolutely no sense, but he's here. And he's apparently malfunctioning, because some other Starfleet personnel are chasing him, and they're even shooting phasers at him. And Data removes his helmet, revealing himself to the villagers, and he removes the rest of his cloaked suit and then shoots the hidden bunker, which reveals it to everyone. So their cover is blown.
You blew my cover!
Then it jumps over to the Enterprise. The senior staff is in full dress uniforms. They are on a diplomatic mission, and they are about to greet some dignitaries from an alien world that has just been accepted into the Federation. They're from a planet with a population of 300 million, which doesn't sound like a lot. And as they enter the turbolift, Picard says, "Remember when we used to be explorers?" Which is funny, and kind of sad. It's like the filmmakers are kind of aware that Star Trek is not what it used to be. And on the way to the reception, they run into Worf, who is randomly here, despite the fact that he's been assigned to Deep Space Nine for a few years now, and no explanation is given for why he's here. When he starts to explain, he's cut off by Picard, because he's just happy to have him here, I guess. I mean, it's incredibly lazy. It's just like, who cares why he's here? We need Worf. You know, he had a good reason to be in First Contact, because he was on the Defiant fighting the Borg. But there's absolutely no reason for him to be here right now. And they meet with the VIPs from this newly minted Federation world, and they're an interesting looking people. And there seems to be some private reluctance on the part of the main crew. It seems like the Federation has kind of lowered its standards for acceptance, because all we know about these people is that they only just achieved warp drive last year, and they're already being accepted into the Federation. But because of the Dominion War and the Borg attack a few years ago, the Federation is probably a little desperate for some allies, which I guess makes sense. And for years, Star Trek fans have wondered why Picard and the Enterprise didn't play a bigger role in the Dominion War, or at least wondered why the Enterprise isn't on the front lines of it. And I think the best answer to that I can come up with is that the Federation really needs allies, and Picard is one of their best diplomats. So rather than tapping into Picard's tactical genius, they're tapping into his diplomatic genius to sort of help bolster the Federation in terms of allies and support, which makes sense to me. But let me know how you feel about it. But of course, the real reason is that the Next Generation cast was too expensive at this point to appear on Deep Space Nine in any kind of significant capacity. But I think it's fair, that's a fair in-universe explanation as to why Picard was not that heavily involved in the war itself. Anyway, the leader of this particular new ally puts this weird hat on Picard's head. So that's nice. I mean, this alone kind of tells you the movie we're in for. And Geordi tells Picard that Admiral Dougherty is aboard a Sona ship and he's requesting Data's schematics. Picard speaks with Dougherty, and he explains that Data is malfunctioning, and that he has also taken people hostage on a planet in a very volatile area of Federation space known as the Briar Patch. It's full of all sorts of dangerous environmental anomalies, and it also prevents communication with anyone outside of it, which it's kind of weird that Dougherty is communicating with Picard when Dougherty is in the Briar Patch and Picard isn't, so that's a little strange to me, but whatever. Picard agrees to send the schematics, and then he gives the order to set a course for the Briar Patch. Then it jumps over to the Sona ship, and Adha Ruafo is introduced. He's the Sona leader, and he's getting some sort of facelift, and it's really not helping. These guys are gray and fleshy, and they use genetic manipulation to keep themselves alive and looking young, despite the fact that they look absolutely horrendous. And Data shows up in a small ship and attacks the Sona vessel. So he really has it out for these guys. And then it jumps back to the Enterprise. They are entering the Briar Patch. Troy and Riker are doing some research on the duct-blind mission and the Sona. Turns out that the Sona use outlawed weapons, slave labor, and if that's not bad enough, they also produce mass quantities of the narcotic Ketracel White, which is what the Dominion uses to keep their soldiers, the Jem'Hadar, in line. So the Sona supply the Dominion with this drug, and it's not super obvious in the movie. If you blink, you'll probably miss it, but that is the implication here. And Troy asks the obvious question, why would we be involved with these people? It remains to be seen. And then Troy and Riker start getting somewhat playful. Frisky, you might say. We'll come back to that. And Worf is asleep in his quarters, even though he was just on the bridge 2 minutes ago. He's ordered to report to the bridge. Once again, why is Worf here? We're just acting like he's part of the Enterprise crew, when he's not. He's just been ordered to report to the bridge, even though he doesn't have a job here. Anyway, they get a hail from Admiral Dougherty and Ruafo. They say they're going to send an assault team after Data. Picard wants to talk to Data first. He tells the Admiral that if his first attempt to capture Data fails, he will terminate him himself, because he's his captain and his friend. Dougherty agrees. And Worf has somehow come up with a way to use a tricorder to deactivate Data. I'm not sure how that works exactly. I mean, the Borg couldn't even come up with something like that. But whatever. Picard and Worf take a shuttle and go after Data. And they end up in kind of a dogfight with him in the atmosphere of this planet. Picard distracts Data by singing a British tar. And it works. They dock the shuttle to the bottom of Data's ship. I don't know how they do that if Data's shields are up, though. I mean, in the episode The Hunted, a small ship actually bounces off the Enterprise's shields. So, I don't know how this would work if Data's shields are up. In any case, the ships are attached, and Worf climbs aboard Data's ship and deactivates him. They get him back to the Enterprise so Geordi can examine him. And in the meantime, Picard, Crusher, and Troy beam down to the planet and talk to the Baku villagers. And these kids are playing hacky sack at super speed. I mean, what the fuck is going on here? It may be the future, but it's still the 90s, so that's nice. And the apparent leader of the Baku, Sojef, introduces himself, along with a woman named Anij. And she's played by Dr. Octopus's wife, so that's great. And Picard says he came to get the Starfleet and the Sona personnel back. He was under the impression that they were being held against their will, but it turns out that it was Data who wouldn't allow them to leave. And Picard asks about Data, and one of the villagers says that there was a phase variance in his positronic matrix that they were unable to repair, which comes as a shock to Picard. Sojef explains that their technological abilities are not apparent because they've chosen not to employ them in their daily lives. It turns out that the Baku have advanced technology, and they even have warp capability. But Sojef says something smug and nonsensical. He says that he believes that when you create a machine to do the work of a man, you take something away from the man. Okay, what exactly do you take away? Back pain? Arthritis? What? I find the Baku to be very annoying. They're so smug about the way they've chosen to live their lives, and it makes it very hard for me to sympathize with their plight in this movie. Anyway, Picard apologizes for the trouble and beams up to the Enterprise with the Starfleet and the Sona crews. He talks to Admiral Dougherty again, and he explains that the Prime Directive hasn't been violated because these people are spacefaring. So their development won't be hindered or changed by an alien presence. But they all should have known this. There is only 600 Baku on the planet. That's the entire population. That is hardly a viable gene pool. So unless you think there's been some kind of cataclysm or war that resulted in genocide, Starfleet should have known right off the bat that these people are not from this planet. And I have no doubt that Admiral Dougherty was aware of this, but the fact that Data and the other Starfleet scientists didn't seem to realize this is a little ridiculous. Anyway, Riker goes to see Troy again. He says he needs a little counseling, but he really just wants to playfully flirt with her for a while. And he asks her if she thinks it's possible for two people to go back in time and fix a mistake they've made. Which is kind of funny, because that is exactly what this crew has done for the last 2 fucking movies. Going back in time and fixing mistakes happens all the time in Star Trek. But of course, he's obviously talking about their relationship. It's being rekindled. Riker kisses Troy, and she pushes him away and says, yuck. And she says, I've never kissed you with a beard before. It's a pretty funny scene, but she actually has kissed him with a beard before. Okay, technically it wasn't him. It was Thomas Riker, his transporter-induced clone. But come on, it's a little silly for her to have this reaction. And Geordi talks to Picard. He tells him that he had to replace several of Data's memory engrams. They were damaged when he was shot by a Sona weapon. and this is what caused him to malfunction, despite the sonar report that they didn't fire on Data until after he malfunctioned. And once he was shot, his ethical and moral subroutines took over all his basic functions. They activate Data, and he seems mostly back to normal. He's confused, and he says that his last memory was being on the planet and observing some kids going into some hills. It's also worth noting that Data doesn't have his emotion chip in this movie. He has removed it. And much like Worf's arrival on the Enterprise, no explanation is given. So, they beam down once more to talk to Sojif's son, Artem. And Sojif asks Artem to show Picard and Data where he was on the day of lightning. See what I mean? These people are just so annoying. They know all about advanced technology. They know what a phaser is. But they insist on telling their children that it was a day of lightning. They're hiding knowledge from their children. And Artem says he was in the hills by the dam. So here we go again. The Baku built a fucking dam. These dumbass hippies claim to reject technology. But not all of it, I guess. Because they have agriculture, they have a dam, they have tools, but they've rejected some technology. I guess they draw the line when it becomes electronic. That's too much for them, I guess. But everything else is just fine. These people are full of shit. Anyway, on the Enterprise, Riker is in the bathtub with Troy, and she is shaving his face with an ancient straight razor. And given how often this ship is jostled by incoming fire, I would hesitate to shave with anything other than a super advanced Starfleet standard issue space razor. But I guess risk is Riker's business. I don't have anything else to say about this scene other than the fact that all of a sudden, Deanna Troi hates beards. And back on the surface, Data's tricorder picks up strong neutrino emissions coming from the lake. So, after going for a swim and playing with a fish, Data discovers a problem. So he uses a massive crank to drain some of the lake. Again, these people have rejected technology, or so they claim. And a ship has been surfaced. A spaceship, that is. So Data, Picard, and Anij row out to it, and they discover that it's a hollow ship. The inside of it is an exact duplicate of the Baku village. And they believe that this holodeck ship was designed to beam the Baku off the planet without them ever knowing it. And Data apparently discovered this, and that's why he was shot, to protect it. And then they get shot at by a Sona soldier. Data and Picard make quick work of him. Seems strange that there is only one guy aboard this giant ship, but okay. And they all end up in the water. And we discover that in the event of a water landing, Data has been designed to function as a flotation device. I have no idea what part of his body is suddenly buoyant. I'll let you speculate on that. In any case, they beam back to the Enterprise, and Worf has developed a gigantic pimple on his nose, which he calls a gorch. And everyone is kind of making fun of him for this. No idea why a dermal regenerator can't immediately fix this problem, but it can't. So Worf will have a giant zit on his face for the remainder of the movie. And Riker shows up, clean-shaven. He says, "Smooth as an android's bottom, eh, Data?" And Data disagrees.
Commander, may I...
You know, for an android without his emotion chip, Data is joking around a lot in this movie. Anyway, Picard goes to his quarters and immediately puts on the mambo and starts dancing around. It's very bizarre, considering the serious nature of what they just discovered on the planet. And Picard looks at himself in the mirror, and he seems to realize something is up. He seems to think he's getting younger, even though it just looks like he put some moisturizer on his face. So he beams back down to the surface. There's a lot of back and forth beaming in this movie. And he talks to Anij, and he asks her how old she is. Turns out that the Baku came from a society on the verge of self-destruction. Their technology created weapons that threatened to destroy all life. So they decided to reject their technology and settle on this planet. And this all happened over 300 years ago. So when they settled here, they came to realize that the planet's rings are full of this metaphasic radiation that is constantly regenerating cells. So the Baku have essentially become immortal just by living here. And obviously the Federation and the Sona are interested in this, although I have questions. I mean, how did the Baku suddenly become peaceful just by rejecting technology? Because on Earth, human beings were killing each other even before swords were invented. And I don't get how they aren't just constantly getting younger, like a whole race of Benjamin Buttons. I mean, but apparently it stops at a certain point, because it's not like they just stopped aging. Sojev says he was a great deal older than he is now when they arrived. So I guess it just de-ages you to whatever point you want, and then it stops. We also find out that Artem isn't super old. He actually is just 12. The radiation won't begin to affect him until he reaches maturity. As though that makes sense. And Sojev says they're unwilling to fight against their forced relocation. He says, the moment we pick up a weapon, we become one of them. In case I haven't made it clear already, I hate this dude. He doesn't want to leave, but he doesn't want to fight to stay. I mean, how useless can you get? To top it all off, he comes off like some sort of dollar store television dad. Like, you know, he's like a reject from Seventh Heaven or some shit. And Picard talks to Anij alone. He says that he'll do everything he can to protect the Baku, and Anij asks Picard if he's ever experienced a perfect moment in time, where time seemed to slow down and even stop. And Picard says he felt that when he saw his home planet from space for the first time. But later we'll find out that Anij is being quite literal about slowing time down. We'll come back to that. And you know, I gotta wonder what the deal is with Sojev and Anij, because Artem is Sojev's son, and Anij kinda seems to be his mother, and they all live under the same roof, and yet Anij is getting flirtatious with Picard, and Sojev couldn't care less. So, are the Baku polyamorous in some way? Who knows? That would have at least made them mildly interesting, but all we can do is speculate. So Picard leaves, and he comes across Geordi, who is looking at a sunrise. He has grown real eyes, which is pretty nuts. I mean, for crying out loud, Geordi is growing new eyeballs in his head, but Picard can't grow his fucking hair back? Alright, maybe they just haven't been here long enough for his hair to grow in yet. But I also have to wonder if this means Picard's heart would grow back at some point, because remember, he has an artificial heart thanks to that Nausicaan Domjot enthusiast.
Domjot! Come and play, Domjot!
Who knows? And Picard heads back to the Enterprise and meets with Rurafo and Admiral Dougherty. And Rurafo just storms into the ready room and demands the release of his men, who were among the Starfleet officers originally held captive by Data when he malfunctioned. And Picard bluntly tells them both that he knows about the holo ship. And Rurafo gets pissed, and his fucking forehead explodes. Okay, I'll tell you what. If you storm into my ready room with your stretched out scrotum face, and you start making all kinds of demands, and then your forehead busts open and you start bleeding on my carpet, we're gonna have words. Get the hell off my ship. I mean, who do you think you're talking to right now? You're a droopy-faced space pirate from a species that no one's ever heard of before, and I'm Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Starship Enterprise. I just killed the fucking Borg Queen. You really want to do this? Sorry. I guess that's Captain Picard if he hailed from the northeast coast of the United States and he had zero diplomatic ability.
Let me ask you a question. Who the fuck do you think you are coming in here talking to me like this?
Anyway, Ruafo storms out, and Picard tells Dougherty that he will take this to the Federation Council. Dougherty says that he's acting on orders from the Federation Council. And Picard says this.
How can there be an order to abandon the Prime Directive?
Prime Directive doesn't apply. These people are not indigenous to this planet. They were never meant to be immortal.
It's very strange that Picard suddenly thinks the Prime Directive has anything to do with this. A few minutes ago, he made it clear that this is not a pre-warp species that is still evolving. So, the Prime Directive doesn't apply, as Dougherty correctly states. And apparently the Sona have a technology that can harvest the planet's Fountain of Youth properties, but it will also make the planet uninhabitable for centuries. So the Baku have to be moved. So Dougherty says, we have the planet and the Sona have the technology. And the Federation apparently can't duplicate this technology. It's very inconvenient. And what's even more inconvenient is that the Sona can't simply settle on another part of the planet in order to reap the benefits. They're too old and they're dying out. The planet won't regenerate them in time. So, this is the only way they can survive. But this is such a non-problem because the Federation and the Sona could simply inform the Baku of this and ask them to move. Then the Sona can harvest the planet, share the benefits with the Federation and the Baku. Everybody wins. But they never approach the Baku with this. They just try to forcibly remove them. Although, to be fair, if they did what I'm suggesting, they would have to rely on a group of space criminals to actually keep their word and share the Fountain of Youth. So, it's all pretty fucking stupid. And Dougherty puts an end to the argument by ordering Picard to leave the system. Once Dougherty leaves, Picard removes his rank insignia. It's pretty clear that he is going to disobey that order, which again, doesn't make a lot of sense. This is a man who did not protest all that much when the Federation began removing colonies in order to placate the Cardassian Union. He was also willing to relocate a group of Native American Indians who had settled on a planet that was contested by Cardassians. He did protest, but he was willing to do it. But here he feels like he has to disobey orders so he can go out and protect 600 arrogant space hippies. And I'm not saying he's wrong for doing so. Quite the opposite. I'm just saying it's a little hypocritical of him to do it now when he hasn't done it at all in the past in similar situations. Maybe it's just the prospect of hooking up with Anij that is motivating him in this instance. Who knows? Anyway, that was a lot of yapping and not a lot of jokes, so let's keep moving. Ruafo is getting another facelift. Let me tell you something, dude. This shit, it's not working. You look horrific. And he meets with his friend Gallatin, a fellow Sona who was just released by Picard. So he finally did release them. Which actually doesn't make a lot of sense when you think about it, because that is a little bit of leverage that Picard could have held on to. But for whatever reason, he doesn't. And Picard gets some weapons together, and he's planning on stealing the captain's yacht, which is a vessel that is apparently docked on the underside of the saucer section. So suddenly Picard thinks he's just Rambo, and he's going to completely solo the Sona and protect the Baku single-handedly. Luckily, the rest of the senior staff have figured this out, and they decide to help him. And Data says this.
Saddle up. Lock and load.
Oh man, it's cringe. And are we sure that he does not have his emotion chip? It's so ridiculous. Anyway, Picard says they won't begin to harvest the planet while the Baku are still on it. Why he believes that, I'll never know. Does he think a group of slavers that are the Dominion's chief drug suppliers have some sort of Batman code about not killing? He's actually just lucky that the Sona don't harvest the planet right away, because they certainly could. In any case, Picard, Data, Worf, Troy, and Crusher head out in the captain's yacht, while Riker and Geordi take the Enterprise out of the Briar Patch to send a signal to Starfleet Command about what's going on here. And on the surface, Picard and company are setting up transport inhibitors that will stop the Sona from beaming anyone off the planet. They plan to use these as cover until they reach some sort of caves filled with kelbonite, which will also prevent beaming. Why they have to walk there, I'll never know, because they could use the transporters on the captain's yacht to beam people in groups to the cave site, but they don't. They don't even use the captain's yacht as air support coverage while they're walking there. And of course, the Sona do attack. They destroy several transport inhibitors, which allow them to beam up some of the Baku, and Sojef is among the ones that were taken. And I, for one, am glad that that fuckhead is gone, at least for the time being. But Ruafo is getting frustrated because they're not getting them off the surface quick enough. He wants to send an assault team down to take them by force. He also wants to send some ships after the Enterprise so they can't get a message to Starfleet. But Dougherty protests, and Ruafo gives a ruthless but somewhat logical speech about how the Federation is dying. He says they've been challenged by every major power in the quadrant, the Borg, the Cardassians, and the Dominion, which is kind of funny because of those three factions, only the Cardassians are native to the Alpha Quadrant. In any case, he convinces Dougherty to allow the Sona to pursue the Enterprise, somehow. I mean, Ruafo clearly means to destroy the Enterprise, and Dougherty seems fine with that. I know he's kind of an evil admiral, but that is a little much, don't you think? I'm also confused as to why Dougherty is not surrounded by any Starfleet personnel. He is an admiral on an enemy ship. I know that they're doing business, but he is technically on an enemy ship. He doesn't have any security with him at all. He's just left to his own devices on this ship. Okay. And down on the planet's surface, Worf is going through Jactala, which essentially means puberty. I don't know how that's possible because he hasn't de-aged to the point where he's a teenager and no one else is going through puberty. I guess we got to chalk it up to another we need to embarrass Worf moment. And they all stop to take a rest. And Picard talks to Anij. And she says it's been 300 years since she's seen a bald man. And then she magically slows time down. Everything around them is suddenly moving slower. And Picard asks, "How are you doing this?" And she says, "No more questions." Okay, that was one fucking question. Could you please answer it? I guess not. And Data overhears a conversation between Troy and Crusher.
And have you noticed how your boobs have started to firm up? Not that we care about such things in this day and age. Uh-huh. Thank you, Data.
I like how Data seems awfully confused by this, and frankly, I'm a little confused myself. Is boob firmness important? Is that relevant? I gotta be honest, I've never touched a tit and said, you know what, this isn't hard enough. It's overcooked. I need an al dente tit. I don't know. I just don't get it. And I have to assume that she means that her boobs are drooping less than they used to. I don't know. And Data repeats this line to Worf, and it's pretty funny.
I have an odd craving for the blood of a live Kolar beast. This environment must be affecting me again.
And have you noticed how your boobs have started to firm up? Not that we care about...
Take cover!
I have to admit, this does make me laugh. I mean, Worf just blurts out that he wants to drink the blood of a living creature right now, and Data barrels right through that comment as if it wasn't a psychotic thing to say, and then he just tells Worf that his boobs are starting to firm up. And then there's a split second before the Sona attack where Worf must just be thinking, what the fuck did he just say to me? I mean, ultimately, it doesn't make a lot of sense for Data to be this childlike, especially without his emotion chip, unless he does have it. I mean, maybe he does have it, and they just forgot to put that scene in the movie. But it's a funny moment nonetheless. And they all take cover in these caves. Convenient that they traveled all this way and only were attacked by the Sona when they were mere yards from the safety of the caves. But the Sona cause a cave-in, and Picard and Anij are trapped, and Anij is badly hurt. So Picard tells her to help him slow time again, so she can stay alive long enough for the crew to dig them out and rescue them. I mean, it makes no sense. Nothing of how this works is ever explained. I'm not going to dwell. It's just magic. And once outside the caves, Crusher scans a downed Sona soldier, and she discovers something unusual. But before she can really elaborate, they're attacked again, and the crew has sort of this weird Magnificent Seven moment, and there's a firefight.
There was a firefight!
And unfortunately, Picard and Anij are taken. Tragic. And while all this is going on, the Enterprise is attacked by two Sona ships. One of the ships tries to hit the Enterprise with an outlawed weapon. It creates a subspace tear, and it's acting like a magnet for the Enterprise's warp core. I'm not sure how that works, but it's basically a hole in space that is following the Enterprise. Geordi suggests ejecting the warp core and detonating it to hopefully seal this subspace tear. They do it, and it works. It's very dramatic. And then Riker uses the ram scoop to collect as much of the crazy briar patch fog as he can, so he can, quote, shove it down the Sona's throat. And the Trill operations officer looks at Riker like she's ready to give him the Riker maneuver. So that's nice. And this movie was directed by Jonathan Frakes, so he likely told this actress to look at him like that, which I think is kind of funny. And then Riker takes the helm, and he does this by breaking out a fucking joystick. That's right. He gives an order, and a joystick emerges from the floor. I don't even know what to say about this. Who designed the Enterprise? Tom Paris? This is absurd. And what advantage does it give you? I mean, if the better way to fly the ship is with an Atari 2600 controller, then why aren't they using it all the time? Like, what does breaking it out now do for them? I don't get it. In any case, the Enterprise releases the ram scoop just as the Sona ships fire on them, and it creates an explosion that destroys one of the Sona ships and cripples the other. So that's great. And Ruafo is very upset when he hears this. He says, "The Enterprise has destroyed one of my ships." Which is funny, because what did he think was going to happen? Did he think the Enterprise wouldn't defend itself? And Ruafo and Doherty go to see Picard, who is being held prisoner on Ruafo's ship with some of the Baku. And Ruafo says that he's had enough. He plans to launch the collector device and harvest the planet, which will kill the remaining Baku on the surface. And Picard reveals what he discovered when Dr. Crusher scanned the Sona officer. He tells Doherty and Ruafo and everyone else in this room that the Sona and the Baku are the same race. So, Ruafo is planning to kill his own people. Sojef shows up again, unfortunately, and he explains that a century ago, a group of young Baku tried to take over the village, and when they failed, they were exiled. Ruafo sees it as more than exile, though. He says they were condemned to die slowly, which, okay. But everyone is kind of condemned to die slowly. That's just life. So he basically just wants revenge for being kicked out of the Garden of Eden. And now that this blood feud has finally been revealed, Doherty seems to realize the error of his ways. He confronts Ruafo in private, and Ruafo just kind of gives him this Undertaker-style chokeslam, and then puts this face stretcher thing on him and stretches his face. And he's apparently dead. I'm not sure how this killed him exactly. I mean, it fucks up his face, but would that really kill him? Who knows? Either way, he's dead. R.I.P. Evil Admiral. So, Ruafo heads back to his bridge to sit on his fancy captain's couch. Yeah, this fucking weirdo put a giant couch in the middle of his bridge. And he orders his crew to deploy the collector. Meanwhile, Ruafo's buddy, Gallatin, is having second thoughts about this whole thing. He was okay with moving the Baku, but he doesn't want to kill them. Understandable. In fact, I'm surprised that he's the only one who feels this way. But whatever. He agrees to help Picard, and they get a message to Data down on the planet's surface. And before long, Data is flying the captain's yacht and attacking Ruafo's ship with tachyon bursts of some kind. No idea how Data was able to get back to the captain's yacht so quickly, because remember, they left it somewhere near the Baku village. And then they proceeded to walk for hours, if not days. So anyway, Data fires these tachyon bursts at Ruafo's ship, which doesn't seem to damage it very much, but it causes them to have to reset their shield harmonics. And suddenly there's a flash of light on the bridge, and everyone ignores it, and they watch the collector device begin to harvest the planet's rings. But then Ruafo realizes that he's not actually on his ship anymore. They were transported over to the hollow ship, which is now somehow in orbit above the planet. I mean, how the fuck did that happen? And how everyone on the bridge just didn't immediately realize that they were transported somewhere? I'll never know that either. Because remember, they wanted the Baku to be asleep in order to beam them anywhere without them realizing it. But for some reason, the Sona crew didn't realize that they were beamed until Ruafo figured it out. Whatever. Moving on. So, the destruction of the planet was obviously a fake. It was a simulation. And now Picard, Worf, and Gallatin are on the actual bridge of Ruafo's ship. They try to destroy the collector, but the weapons won't fire. For some reason, they're locked out. And they find that Ruafo has beamed from the holoship over to the collector device, and he has begun to launch it manually. Worf says they can beam between the collector's shield generators if they are within 100 meters, which doesn't make sense to me. I mean, if there's a gap in the shield, why do they need to be close to it? What difference would that make? It should work at any distance. But whatever. Picard is beaming over to stop Ruafo, which also doesn't make any sense because Worf is your tank. Send your tank into battle. But they can't send Worf because Patrick Stewart is #1 on the call sheet and he loves being an action hero in these movies. And after Picard beams over, the Sona crew on Ruafo's ship breach the door to the bridge and they attack Worf. No idea why they couldn't just be beamed onto the holoship too, or for that matter, beamed to the planet. They could have just beamed Ruafo and his entire crew over to the holoship, and then, before they even rematerialize, they could have beamed them to the planet's surface where they would be no threat to anyone. But I guess they thought that would be anticlimactic. So they set this up because they thought it would be more exciting. And Worf fights off the Sona crew pretty well, but then he inexplicably tries to send a message to Picard. Why he does that, I'll never know. He was winning the fight. It's not like Picard can help him anyway. So why is he trying to talk to Picard? No idea. Either way, they subdue Worf, so now the Sona crew have retaken the bridge. Picard has no way off the collector, but luckily, the Enterprise is approaching. No idea how it's getting back so fast without their warp core, but it's almost here. I mean, maybe they can't even use warp in the Briar Patch, who knows? And after a brief fight with Ruafo, Picard gets to the controls and initiates a self-destruct sequence. He's managed to do this with technology that he is completely unfamiliar with. So, it's a miracle. And the collector ship explodes. Picard is beamed safely to the Enterprise just in time, and it's kind of hilarious that they just leave Ruafo to die. Like, there's no reason they couldn't have also just beamed him out too, but they just said, nah, fuck it. Let that scrotum head die. And Riker tells Picard that the Federation has halted the Baku relocation and they're conducting a top-level review. So that's nice. All seems well. And on the planet's surface, Riker talks to Geordi and Worf, and they say their goodbyes to the Baku. And Riker wonders if his feelings about Troi will change once he leaves this place. Worf says, "Your feelings for her have not changed since the day I met you, Commander. This place just let them out for a little fresh air." Which is interesting, especially coming from Worf, who was briefly involved in a relationship with Troi himself. And some of the Sona, including Gallatin, reunite with their Baku family members, despite the fact that Sojev says there's too much bitterness on both sides. I mean, don't you hate this guy? I mean, the Baku are immortal. Are you telling me they don't have enough time to figure this out with the Sona? Although, it is kind of dark, because as we know, the Sona are still going to die. They are too far gone for this planet's benefits to reverse their aging in time. So it's great that they're having this little reunion, but it's not going to end well, is it? And Picard says goodbye to Anij. He says he has 318 days of shore leave coming, and he intends to use them. But he didn't seem to use them here, because as far as we know, he never returns to this shitty planet, and who could blame him? And then the crew beams back to the Enterprise, and they head home, at impulse. So it should only take them a few centuries to get there. So that's nice. The end. Overall, not great. Pretty forgettable. And while at first glance it doesn't appear to have a ton of massive flaws, it actually does have quite a few once you really look at it. I mean, first of all, it's not even really an insurrection, is it? I mean, they are disobeying orders, yes, but it's not that they're revolting against the Federation. Nothing they do here is going to overthrow the Federation government, so even the title is a little misleading. And the Baku Sona problem isn't really a problem, or at least it doesn't have to be. If the Sona had just approached the Federation with all the information, I have no doubt that they would have been able to negotiate a peace between the Sona and the Baku. And everyone would have been able to benefit from the healing properties of this planet. But the Sona are terrible people, and the Federation should have known that from the start. They are slavers who use illegal subspace weapons, and they do business with a faction that is actively at war with the Federation. What did they expect would happen? It also takes them way too long to figure out that the Sona and the Baku are the same race. Even if the Sona refused to be scanned, just beaming them up would probably indicate that they are essentially the same race. And ultimately, I have a hard time sympathizing with the Baku. They're just so smug and arrogant. And they're hogging this entire planet just so they can live out their fantasy of being less advanced than they really are. And it's not just the Sona that were willing to commit genocide, because the Baku did the same thing when they exiled the Sona, because they obviously can't reproduce for some reason, so the Sona were just condemned to die. So both sides are pretty shitty in my opinion. And Admiral Dougherty is an interesting character. I gotta wonder if he's not involved with Section 31 in some way, because this reeks of, secret shadow government shit, where the ends always justify the means. And this whole planet revitalized the crew and made them feel things that they haven't felt in a long time. Riker and Troi reignite their romance, and that will continue into the next movie. But sadly, for some reason, Picard just wants to hook up with this random Baku nobody, instead of Dr. Crusher, for example. I mean, wouldn't that have been the perfect opportunity to trigger a romance between these two characters? It's not like they haven't hinted at it for 7 years, so why not? It just doesn't make that much sense to me. That would have been so much more satisfying and genuine than just giving Picard a romance of the week with someone that, frankly, nobody really cares about. Instead, Crusher is barely a character in this movie, and I think that's unfortunate. And Data has somehow reverted back to a childlike state in this movie. Maybe it's from hanging out with Artem, but it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Data has some funny lines in this movie, but ultimately I think he was wasted. And overall, as I said, it's just kind of a nothing movie. It's very forgettable. But that's my overall thoughts on the movie. I should probably wrap this up. And obviously, the next Star Trek movie on the list is Nemesis. But I'm going to hold off on that for a while because I've got some other video ideas I want to focus on in the next few months. But I'm definitely going to have a video for Nemesis before the end of the year. Probably November or December. So keep an eye out for that. And I also want to thank everybody for the great comments and the likes. You guys have been awesome. I don't say it enough, but I really appreciate the support. And I try to get back to all your comments as soon as possible, but I know that I'm lagging behind. So don't take it as an insult if I haven't gotten to you yet. I'm planning on responding to every one of your comments because I really do appreciate it. But that's about all I got for now. Let me know what you think of Star Trek Insurrection. And until next time, take it easy.
And have you noticed how your boobs have started to firm up?